Hi folks, Canadian Prepper here. So today I want to address the question of, am I a Doomsday Prepper? Let's talk about it. Well, the answer isn't that simple. First, we have to define what exactly is a Doomsday Prepper. So I suspect there's no Oxford English definition of what it means to be a Doomsday Prepper. So I would describe a Doomsday Prepper as somebody who's preparing for a national or global disaster that entails the collapse of government, the collapse of critical infrastructure for a prolonged period of time, and that is going to entail societal unrest and most notably the breakdown of law and order. Now, it is presumed that an event like this would entail a major loss of life, if not caused by the event itself, or caused afterwards as a result of the failing infrastructure's inability to provide people with what they need in order to survive: food, water, shelter, security. It is presumed that this lack of resources is going to contribute to a major die-off of the human population within a relatively short period of time. But just to go off on a little tangent here, the reality is, if something like this were to happen, people aren't just going to take that lying down. The lengths that human beings will go to survive is going to surprise even the most grandiose of Doomsday Preppers. See, Hollywood has painted this picture of the moronic antagonistic hordes. You know, the expendable bad guys who have no name, who have no backstory, who are a dime a dozen, and the main protagonist takes them out as they come through the door. The reality is, everybody has a backstory, everybody has a family, and everybody has a will to live, which is as intense as a prepper when things get down to the wire. Now, there are going to be varying degrees of what it means to be a Doomsday Prepper. On the lower end of that spectrum are people who are preparing for a large catastrophe, perhaps national in scope, in which they foresee a prolonged, albeit temporary, suspension in the delivery of critical services. But on the higher end of the Doomsday Prepper spectrum, you have people preparing for global disaster, which are not going to be resolved in any tangible length of time. Therefore, they're preparing for Mad Max, basically. Now, the elephant that's always in the room when we're talking about Doomsday Preparedness is whether or not this is rooted in paranoid delusions. In order to understand whether preparing for an unprecedented and prolonged grid-down scenario is crazy, we need to ask a few questions. So the first question we have to ask is whether or not it even can happen. Is it possible? Because if it is impossible, if a collapse of civilization is impossible, then indeed, Doomsday Preparedness is a paranoid delusion which should not be taken seriously by anybody. On the topic of whether or not it could happen, the answer is, of course it could happen. There's a reason why the Department of Homeland Security identifies areas of critical infrastructure. Critical infrastructure, meaning that should these systems fail, it is going to lead to the breakdown of society. So could it happen? Absolutely. It's happened several times throughout history, it just hasn't happened recently. Things like pandemics, environmental disasters. There could be a pathogen that sweeps the globe that takes out some of these staple food crops. There could be a conflict. There could be economic crisis. And at the end of the day, we're just a rock floating in space, which is at the whim of solar flares, which could wipe out our power grid. Asteroids, which of course could destroy a significant portion of the planet. So absolutely, it could happen. The real delusion from an APA perspective, that's the American Psychological Association, should be the idea that we've somehow graduated both biologically and socially and politically from that phase of our evolution in which those things are not going to be a problem anymore. So indeed, it is possible, but just because something is possible doesn't make it probable or likely. And that is where the paranoid delusion and the obsessive compulsiveness comes in. And that's where people are rightly charged with being a little nutty when it comes to preparedness. So in my mind, then, there's rational Doomsday Preppers and there's irrational Doomsday Preppers. What does it mean to be a rational Doomsday Prepper? A rational Doomsday Prepper is somebody who takes care of their health. Health and physical fitness should be your main priority when it comes to prolonging your lifespan. And that's what preparedness is all about, prolonging your lifespan and preserving a high quality of life. The second thing that allows you to be a rational Doomsday Prepper is that you are a productive member of society. You work a job, you pay your taxes. The third thing is that you're not fixated on one particular event happening. It's one thing to be skeptical, but when you start making predictions about things of such a grandiose scale and base your life around those what if predictions, that's when it becomes delusional, in my opinion. If this macro preparedness doesn't diminish the quality of your life and actually enhances it, then in my opinion, that is not paranoid at all. That is not irrational. And lastly, your desire to be prepared should be based on accurate information, should be based on objective facts. Just the simple possibility that something could happen is justification enough, in my personal opinion, to be relatively prepared for 6 months to a year. So if you're a person who's not taking care of your health, if you are basing your prepping on false information, if you are not contributing to society in a constructive way, if preparedness is getting in the way of your life, and if you're fixated on one event happening, then yeah, rightly so, you should be criticized as paranoid and delusional. But the opposite of paranoia is being naive. And we can flip the script and say, is it delusional to not be a prepper, at least to some extent? How many times a day do you think the average person considers the fact, just like as a passing thought, that their existence relies on critical infrastructure? You often hear the metaphor, the fish doesn't know it's in water. Well, a lot of people are not even aware that critical infrastructure is a thing, and that without it, they would not be able to survive. So if you're not aware that that's a thing, well, you're never going to graduate to the next step in that reasoning to say, well, these things could be compromised at some point, and that would impact my ability to survive. Therefore, maybe I should have some measure of self-reliance. I would suspect that the average person has that passing thought maybe once or twice a year. Or if they do, it's almost like a joke, and they believe that the possibility of it ever happening is so infinitesimally small that it's not even worth considering. And so some people will say, well, yeah, you're going to waste your life, you're wasting a lot of time and energy and resources for this thing which may never happen, and you may live your whole life and nothing will happen, and then was it all in vain? Well, there's a lot of things that you could argue people do in vain. The biggest channel on YouTube is a guy who just plays video games all day, and people spend hours and hours on end watching this individual play video games. If that's not time spent in vain, I don't know what is. But nobody is calling that delusional. Nobody is calling it delusional when a person fixates on pixels on a screen in a virtual created reality, in a simulated reality, which is not tangibly real. Nobody criticizes that as delusional or crazy, when really it is make-believe. You're entering into a fake, fictitious world where you're telling yourself it's real, but the reality is it's just pixels on a screen. But nobody criticizes people for that being delusional because, hey, it's a big industry and it's fun, it's entertaining. So you'll often hear people say as a knee-jerk defensive reaction that, well, if something like that happened, I wouldn't want to survive anyways. Bull crap, you wouldn't want to survive. Of course you would want to survive. I mean, do you really think that your will to live is just going to suddenly stop when things get down to the wire? Their will to survive is going to be as intense as anybody else. They're not just going to want to lay down and die. This is just a defensive mechanism or reaction that people have to protect themselves from really coming to terms with the reality of their dependence on technology in order to survive. No one wants to think about the fact that if the grid were to go down, that within a couple weeks they would be dead. Nobody wants to think about that. And in many ways, the grid does not reward self-reliance in preparedness. You get more rewards by fully immersing yourself in the grid. You get more rewards by living downtown, for instance, plugged right into the matrix, than you would living in some rural off-grid homestead. If you want to enjoy everything civilization has to offer, you have to make yourself very vulnerable. And for a lot of people, they're very enticed by that lifestyle. So when faced with the reality of their vulnerabilities within these collapsing infrastructure scenarios, they just say, well, I wouldn't want to survive anyways. And as previously indicated, that's a load of crap. So the question is Canadian Prepper a doomsday prepper? So here's a soundbite for all the trolls and all the people that want to use this against me in the future. But yes, Canadian Prepper is a doomsday prepper because I fulfill the 5 criteria. I take care of my health. I don't let preparedness interfere with my lifestyle. I base my preparedness on sound, logical arguments. I'm not preparing for a specific event. and I am a productive member of society who pays a lot of taxes. Now, for all of the people who do spend upwards of 24 hours a week watching the WWF, watching soap operas, watching mind-numbing TV shows, playing video games, spending thousands and thousands of dollars on sporting events, whether or not we deem that to be mentally ill is another story. But I would venture to say that if you do those things, that's fine, so long as you fulfill the 5 criteria and the additional one that you do have some provisions in place to take care of yourself should times get a little turbulent down the road. Let me know what you think in the comment section. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe. If you enjoyed the video, there's a lot more like this coming down the road. Thanks for watching Canadian Prepper. The best way to support this YouTube channel is to support yourself by gearing up through CanadianPreparedness.com or BugoutRoll.ca. Premium quality gear at the best possible price using the incredibly secure and easy to use Shopify platform. We offer free shipping to the United States for orders over $200 USD and free shipping to Canada over $75. So support the channel by supporting yourself.